Colossians 2:14 that the handwriting of ordinances was nailed to the cross. And some of our Christian friends nail all the laws to the cross, except that one, we should, love each other as Christ has loved us. And we say, no, you can't nail all the laws up there, only the ceremonial law. Because we have sought to preserve the Decalogue, haven't we? And we don't want the Ten Commandments nailed. And then you look at the verse more closely. What was it that was nailed to the cross? Something that was against us, something that was contrary to us. He took it out of the way and nailed it to the cross. Was the ceremonial law against us? It taught righteousness by faith, and one begins to wonder what it was that was nailed to the cross. And then you read in some versions that he canceled the bond which stood against us with its legal demands. Now, what is this bond? These are very interesting verses to look up in the various versions, and then a commentary or two to get the possible interpretations. What I like with these verses is that one can disarm one's critics by surprising them, by going right along with them and saying, absolutely, Christ is the end of legalism as a way of being saved. You bet we're not under law in our relationship with God. We're under grace. And absolutely, something was nailed to the cross. What was it, though? See that one. Then Galatians 3:24 and 5, the law was added because of transgressions to be our schoolmaster, to bring us to Christ. Now, what law was our schoolmaster to bring us to Christ? And now that we have come to Christ, we're no longer under the schoolmaster. Well, to save the Ten Commandments, we say that can't be the Decalogue. That has to be the ceremonial law to bring us to Christ. That's strange. If the ceremonial law was to bring us to Christ, how could we say it was against us and contrary to us and nail it to the cross in Colossians 2:14 and say how wonderful it was in bringing us to Christ in Galatians 3:25? So what law was it that was our schoolmaster to bring us to Christ? This is one of the arguments at the Minneapolis General Conference, when Jones and Waggoner said it's all law, both the moral and the ceremonial, and the roof fell in on them, and someone went to Ellen White and said, what law is it? And she replied, it's now in print in Selected Messages. It was both the moral and the ceremonial laws. In fact, if it was one law above another, it was the moral code of the Ten Commandments. To bring us to Christ, added because of sin. And when we've come to Christ, we're no longer under the Ten Commandments. What would that mean? For Romans 3:31, does faith do away with the law? No, it says faith establishes the law. In what way does faith establish law? Well, these are the texts. Romans 6:14, what does it mean that we're not under the law but under grace? What does that mean? Just interpret that essence of the verse. Romans 10:4, Christ is the end of the law. What does that mean? Colossians 2:14, what was it that was nailed to the cross? Galatians 3:24 and 25 are the central verses, though one needs to read 19 to 26 at least. What law was our schoolmaster to bring us to Christ? And when we've come to Christ, we're no longer under this. Schoolmaster is not a good translation. It's custodian, our guardian. Then Romans 3:31 speaks for itself. Though what did Paul mean when he said faith establishes the law? Faith does not do away with the law, it establishes it. And then lastly, John 8:32, where Jesus said, you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. In what sense? You know, we're so concerned to preserve the authority of the law that we limit this verse to freedom from sin. Because we're so afraid to suggest that one can actually feel free in his relationship with God and in his relationship with the law and its requirements. And to me, that's the essence of the thing. More important, well, I don't want to say more important, but in context, more emphatic than our freedom from sin. Besides, what is freedom from sin but freedom from a rebellious attitude toward the law? So it really is involved. It's the same thing. But when Jesus said, you shall know the truth, and the truth will set you free, was he referring to the truth about God? And if we knew the truth about God, and that he never asks us to do anything that is not for our best good, and that he values nothing higher than the freedom of his intelligent creatures, then we really can become free. And it's possible to be obedient and free at the same time. Now, some suggest you can be free without being obedient. Well, it depends what it is God has asked us to obey. As we understand it, there's no way to have freedom if we're lawless. It's only if we're orderly and live our lives in harmony with the description of orderly living in God's orderly universe that we find in the Ten Commandments and elsewhere. There's no freedom without mutual love and trustworthiness and respect. Use the scriptural index to the writings of Ellen White, and she comments on these verses. Most of all, for example, on Galatians 3, What Law Was Our Schoolmaster, First Selected Messages, page 233 and following. The law in Galatians is the chapter title, and her question, what law is referred to in the verse, the law is our schoolmaster to bring us to Christ? And her answer is categorical. She even speaks of the resistance to this explanation, and she says an unwillingness to yield up preconceived opinions and accept the truth that the law that is our schoolmaster to bring us to Christ is both the Ten Commandments and the ceremonial law, lay behind much of the resistance that was experienced at the Minneapolis General Conference, and that Satan thus shut us away from the truth that was to be the light that would lighten the earth with all its glory and make possible the finishing of the work. An unwillingness to understand the place of God's law in his free universe. A failure to understand that is the primary reason for the delay, as represented, I believe, in that chapter. And it makes good sense, because to understand God's use of law in his free universe is to understand what the great controversy is all about, because it includes understanding God's attitude toward those who are unwilling to obey this law and to live the kinds of lives that are described by these laws. What is God's attitude toward such people, and what does he do to them? This is what the great controversy is all about. And it would involve answering the question, how could God say, you shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free, and by the way, don't do this, and don't do that, and don't do the other thing? Have you ever listed all the requirements and prohibitions that we Adventists are willing to submit to? It's an enormous list. You need a long piece of paper. An Adventist does the following, and he doesn't do the following. And after reading that long list, you come to a sentence at the end where God says, apart from this, you are truly free. And our young people can't handle that at all. Maybe some of us who are older can't handle it. Is it possible to be obedient without reservation to the last detail and yet feel free at the same time? I think that's the contribution that Adventists were asked to make above all else. And we are famous for our obedience. There are very complimentary articles being written about us these days. Our tithe paying and all the rest of it. Are we famous for helping people understand how you can be obedient and free at the same time, which reflects so creditably upon God and his really good news? It's rather that people admire us for our willingness to obey a lot of rules they think we shouldn't have to obey at all. That doesn't help very much. So in the end, they admire us, but they don't admire our God. So what's the use of that?